Top of the world. Uneasy lies the head that wears a crown. William Shakespeare, Henry IV, Part 2. I had to keep pinching myself. I had actually been crowned Miss India World less than 2 months earlier. I had been studying overtime, getting tutored in chemistry, physics, and math, and generally stressing out over my academic future. I had kept my eyes on the prize of passing the boards with little awareness of anything beyond that. Now I was to be living in Mumbai for the next 10 months, fulfilling my Miss India commitments and then representing my country on an international stage in the Miss World pageant. It was a lot to wrap my mind around. While my family had planned in advance for how we had handled the logistics of spending a month in Mumbai, in the unlikely event that I made it beyond the preliminary competition in New Delhi, no plans had been made beyond that. Why put an energy into it? There was no chance that I had win, but now that I had, my family had to kick it into gear instantly as my Miss India commitments would begin immediately. I was 17, so mom and dad divided up the task of their lives and mine and worked the equation. As usual, they approached the whole thing as if it were a giant mathematical logic problem. First and most pressing problem was to find me a safe place to stay in Mumbai. Once that was accomplished, mom would temporarily return to Bareilly. My father had taken over most of our patients for the month we had already been in Mumbai, but that was always understood to be a short term arrangement. The new plan needed to be something everyone could live with for the long haul, as I would be in Mumbai until November. When I would go to London for the Miss World competition, that meant I had been away for almost a year and mom would be with me for months at a time. Among other things, my parents would have to hire a new doctor to assume my mother's duties at their hospital. Thank goodness Nani still lived with us so she could take care of Sid, who was 11. What would we have done without her as a steady presence in our household for more than a decade, helping raising us, supervising homework, helping to shape the adults we would grow into? Mom quickly found accommodations for me, a single room in the Santa Cruz neighborhood of the city. I was supposed to have the room to myself, but then a girl named Tamanna Sharma arrived, and she was supposed to have the room to herself. When we figured out that the landlord had lied to both of us that he could get double the rent, we foiled his evil plan by sharing the room and splitting the rent between us. There was one bed, one closet, two shelves, a little dressing table, and a window. That's it. But we made it work, and Tamanna and I became best friends. 18 years later, she would be the maid of honor at my wedding. In spite of all my travels, I was still only 17 and I had almost always had some kind of adult supervision. When I was in school, my teachers and principal were responsible for me. I was at home, family members were responsible for me. In both places, there were rules to follow and people to be accountable to at different points during the day. Once mom returned to Bareilly, all that changed, and well, you can guess what this boundary pushing teenage girl did. Here I was in Mumbai, one of the most populous cities in the world, and the energy of the never sleeping metropolis was calling out to me. I was practically giddy to be living in a place with so much vitality, excitement, and nightlife. Various family members had done their best to rein me in over the past few years, and I was ready to make up for lost time, going through a crazy phase with Tamanna where we partied several nights a week. Tamanna was working as a flight attendant for Sahara Airlines then, and all her flights were short daytime hops. If I didn't have any responsibilities on a given day, I might stay in bed until afternoon. When Tamanna got back from work, she and I would figure out which party we were going to that night and spend hours getting ready. There were always fashion industry parties that were eager to have the presence of the new Miss India, and boy, did we take advantage of that. We had leave the apartment at around 10 p.m. ready to take on the world in our tiny skirts and extremely high heels, not the safest thing to do, even though Mumbai is generally a safe city. To make things even riskier, we didn't have a car, which meant that we arrived at every party assuming we had met someone we knew who would be able to drop us back home. Well, that's not exactly true. I had been gifted a Daewoo Matiz after winning Miss India, but neither Tamanna nor I knew how to drive. So, for the longest time, it just sat on the street. Finally, we figured out that we could hire a driver to get us to from parties safely. The three of us made quite a side zipping around late night Mumbai in the tiny Matties. Our massive driver took up most of the front of the car. It was two sizes too small. As Tamanna and I squeezed together in the back. Freedom was a whole new concept to me, something I clearly hadn't yet learned how to handle. Somehow we made it through unscathed and came out the other side armed with a ton of stories. We made a best friends pact never to share them ever, except maybe with our kids someday. These months, while mom was gone, I wasn't only partying. In my Miss India capacity, I appeared at inaugurations and charity events, visited schools, and met heads of local government. I was also free to work, so I was able to model and get runaway experience in fashion shows, as well as do cover and editorial shoots for magazines. When mom returned to Mumbai after a few months of taking care of business in Bareilly, I happily gave up the late night revelry. Gotten it out of my system permanently, it seems. Moved with her into accommodations arranged by Bade Papa, and Tamanna moved to a rented apartment of her own. We saw each other occasionally, but now I had to sharpen my focus on the task at hand, training for the Miss World competition. Training for this international competition was far more advanced and intense than the training for the Miss India competition had been. There were about 30 girls competing for the Miss India title, and we had received a month of group training with classes and demonstrations. All of that had been valuable to me, and I had eagerly soaked it up. This training was to be one on one though, and was preparing me to compete against 94 contestants from around the globe. One of the many professionals I trained with was Sabira Merchant, a world class public speaking and diction coach. She was responsible in large part of my polished presentation skills, having taught me how to formulate my thoughts and articulate them in complete sentences on the spot and under pressure. She trained me to pause and think, foregoing unconscious stalling mechanism like and well, so that my speech was clear, direct, and unself-conscious. In the process of all this, she helped rid me of my nasal twang, which she said made me come across as a Yankee sounding person. Worked relentlessly with me on enunciating my vowels and speaking with a global English accent, which meant to no more rolling of my R's. I worked hard and faithfully and still use some of the skills that she taught me today. I got plenty of exercise preparing for the talent round through my training with Shamak Dawar's dance troupe, member of which helped train me for the Bollywood meets contemporary Indian dance piece I had decided to perform. Then there was the gym, Talwalkar's, where I showed up reliably each morning. I could have skipped it, but I didn't want to be considered a slacker. In this one regard, though, I kind of was. I had showed up there and sign in, then go outside to the juice counter and talk to friends. I didn't have an athletic body, but I was slender and blessed with a metabolism that kept me that way. Hashtag now you know. Dr. Jamuna Pai, a well known dermatologist, taught me about skincare. I consulted with Dr. Anjali Mukherjee, a dietitian, who advised me on healthy eating and sent me to London with a supply of nourishing snacks. I saw Dr. Sandesh Maikar, a cosmetic dentist, who made sure my smile sparkled. I still see him today. Husband and wife hair and makeup team of Bharat and Doris worked with me to make sure I knew how to look my best at all times. Perhaps the most fun part of the prep was meeting with top fashion designers who consulted with me on what to wear and how to wear it. Since I had always loved making a statement with my clothing, I relished these sessions. I ended up wearing a lot of Ritu Kumar's design during the month that the Miss World contestants spent in London before the pageant itself. On the final night of the televised show, I wore a gorgeous, soft peach strapless gown designed by Hemant Trivedi. There was one slight challenge with it though that only became apparent on the actual night of the pageant, more on that later. Ara, Dia, and I were responsible only for our accommodations and travel while we were training. The Miss India pageant organization generously took care of everything else, and I will be forever grateful for everything I learned in my months of prep. We were trained and groomed until we were the absolute best versions of ourselves that we could possibly be. We knew we weren't in our pageant as mere individuals at the point. We all felt both the responsibility and the honor of representing India in the eyes of the world. By early November, it was time to go to London. Arriving at the airport in that city was a replay of arriving at the Ashoka Hotel for the Miss India preliminaries almost a year earlier. I watched as a stream of tall, gorgeous women from all around the world strode and shaded and glided toward the baggage carousels, each arriving from her own point on the globe. I watched as they retrieved their so gracefully and floated through the throngs of other travelers to the exit doors and they disappeared outside to find the vehicles that would take us to our hotel. I was just giving myself a stern talking to in order to prevent my insecurity from taking over when wait, there was Lionel Richie having my very first European celebrity sighting be one of my absolute favorite singers was enough to lift my spirits and send me out to join the other girls happy and re-energized. Hilton in central London was to be our home for the next few weeks and I settled in quickly with my roommate Ganga Guna Sekara, Miss Sri Lanka. Each day was packed full at 8 a.m. or so. All 95 of us plus chaperones would pile onto the buses that awaited us outside the hotel and head out for a day of press conferences, photo shoots, media appearances, charity events, and sightseeing. Every morning, take a train into London from Hounslow, where she and Dad and Sid were staying with family friends, the Upadhyayas, to offer me a cheerful wave and a bit of encouragement from afar before I climbed onto the bus. Even though there was no opportunity to speak on those mornings, she wanted to be sure I felt her support. When we returned to the hotel in the evenings, there was about an hour when we were free to visit with any family who may have traveled to London. Mom was always there, sometimes with Dad and Sid, sometimes on her own, and she was always the last to leave. She was my anchor there for me, morning and night. Even now, when I pass that London hotel, I can picture the buses parked there and the girls coming in and out and the spot in the lobby where we used to meet our families. Even now, I can remember seesawing between the anxiety and the total excitement I felt every day. Rarely did I find a midpoint of calm equilibrium. After seeing me off in the morning, Mom would sometimes be joined by the rest of my family. They had spent the day sightseeing and shopping for things for the pageant, a certain shade of makeup or a particular item of clothing, perhaps. That had to have been lots of fun for Sid. Mom would frantically contact Vimla Mami back in Newton, Massachusetts, request for random but essential items. Mami would immediately send multiples of whatever my mother said I needed, little black dresses or strappy sandals, so that I could choose whatever fit and looked best. Earlier, prior to the Miss India competition, my mother had prepped me every night for the question and answer rounds I had been facing in the pageant. Back then, she had gone to the street market by the majestic Flora fountain in the Fort Business District South Mumbai to look through the tons of books for sale on the sidewalk. She had bought an assortment of general knowledge volumes and then come through them to come up with her own questions. Also compiled a master list of Miss India questions from the past 10 years. Then she had quizzed me using the lists and helped me craft relevant, thoughtful, and articulate answers to political and societal questions. But now, we had just 60 short minutes each evening to prepare in whatever way we could. I was thinking about she might begin, or maybe you could say something like, and then she had built on whatever we had talked about the prior night, or do her best to help me think through a new scenario she had been mulling over in the 24 hours since I had last talked to her. She knew that we were being introduced to the press and to the world at large through a variety of events around London at dinners, fundraisers, sporting events, meet and greets, and she was certain that being well informed and well spoken would make a defining difference. All of us felt that we were being graded at every moment by the chaperones who accompanied us everywhere. Convinced that they were reporting back to the esteemed Julia Morley, businesswoman, former model, and chair of the Miss World organization, which her husband had founded in 1951 and had run until his death earlier that year. Miss Morley, as we were instructed to call her, was perfect. Her manners were perfect, her voice was perfect, and she walked with such effortless grace that she seemed to float an inch above the ground. All desperately wanted to be like her. The Miss World 2000 pageant was the first one that she was running on her own. And every time she spoke to us, I was awestruck and intimidated. I am pretty sure we all were when she or any of the chaperones were anywhere near. We wouldn't gossip, complain, slouch, our mouths full, or do anything else that wasn't 100% Miss Morley worthy. Now, I had access to the most stylish clothes, but that doesn't mean I always put all my wardrobe components together in the most artful way. I may have occasionally over accessorized with the bangles and the dangly earrings, or sported too many sparkly items, or worn more makeup than necessary. I hadn't yet learned what I know now: less is more. But I was able to speak and carry myself with confidence, or in those moments where my confidence failed me, with a conviction that seemed like confidence. I was not the same person that I had been when I had participated in the Miss India pageant 11 months earlier. Then I didn't have a lot of tools in my toolbox or brushes in my makeup kit. I hadn't really understood what would be required for me. I was just a high school girl busy with high school things who, with plenty of determination and family help, pulled out a miraculous win. Once I had garnered the Miss India World crown, I had to learn fast and under pressure. My toolbox was as full as it was ever going to get, and that knowledge gave me a sense of self-assurance. I knew what was required of me, and I knew, theoretically at least, that I should be able to do well. Asked by the press at a dinner or charity gala, how does it feel representing India, or India's had so many amazing winners, do you feel pressure to win your pageant? I tried for two things in my answers: to sound confident and to embody beauty with a purpose, the phrase used to distinguish the Miss World pageant from other international pageants. I didn't go in as a favorite to win, but by the end of the month, I had heard that I had gained considerable momentum with the bookmakers in England, especially after the final week of interacting with the media and others at all our events. The 10 months of preparation and growth had paid off, and yes, there is betting on the Miss World pageant in England and elsewhere. To make myself stand out in the crowded international field, I had been encouraged by my Miss India team to represent my culture to the fullest. I took the counsel to heart when it came to dressing and accessorizing myself for the pageant. Especially for one particular event before the ceremony, I was grateful for Mrs. Morley's choice to not have an on-stage swimwear round for Miss World that year. Instead, prior to the actual pageant, all the contestants were flown to a resort in the Maldives where we shot videos on the beach that would be used in lieu of the live event. For me, who had so hated the swimsuit and heels part of the Miss India preliminaries, wearing a bathing suit in natural environment on an actual beach rather than on a stage or in a hotel suit was a gift. Something I could easily do without being self-conscious. International press was brought to the Maldives to cover our day in the sun and sand. We frolicked in the water wearing our country sashes as a huge group of photographers snapped photo after photo. Because I had been advised by my various trainers to bring Indian culture and ethnicity to the fore, I decided to wear a bandhani sarong and then added bangles and a bindi to the mix. My sarong covered one piece with my bangles and my bindi and a large flower tucked behind my ear. I thought I was both fashionable and true to my country. In retrospect, the outfit was overkill, but it worked. Though I was being encouraged by the photographers to take off my sarong, I took a stand that I wouldn't. And in spite of the fact that I was the most covered up body out there, I still ended up being one of the most photographed contestants that day. I guess my culture had my back. Miss World 2000. The 50th Miss World pageant was held on November 30, 2000. That morning, Ganga and I and our fellow contestants descended on London's Millennium Dome to get dressed and coiffed and made up for the television cameras in an explosion of sound and motion and color. Imagine the scene, close to 100 young women laughing and calling out to one another and practically bursting with nervous excitement. There must have been 50 glam stations throughout the massive ballroom that was our staging area, and with the voices of all the hair and makeup artists and their assistants and their coordinators, the cacophony was almost dizzying. I felt like I was a part of huge chaotic ballet with an overactive sound system and an unruly corpse de ballet. The energy in the room was contagious and building on itself by the minute. After I had made it through my own hairstyling, I decided I could use a quick touch up and asked to borrow a stylist curling iron. With all the congestion, I got jostled and accidentally burned my forehead with the hot metal. The skin scabbed, which meant I had to apply a ton of foundation to try to cover it up. That didn't fully work, so I added another form of camouflage, and now I can finally explain why I had that crazy tendril of hair swirling down over my left eye. Before I went on stage for the first round, I pulled out the picture of Heda Khan Baba that I had tucked into my dress. In times of stress, it reminds me of who I am and where I come from. I took a moment to ask Babaji for his help and to express my thanks for all of the ways in which I had been so incredibly blessed, and then I tucked the picture back into my dress. As we went through the various rounds of competition that evening, the tension in the Millennium Dome was palpable. When I was chosen as one of the 5 finalists, I was both stunned and thrilled. This was the question and answer round, and thanks to Mom and her endless research and quizzing, I believed it was my strongest event. Each of the 5 final contestants, Miss Italy, Miss Turkey, Miss Uruguay, and Miss Kazakhstan, and I were to write question that would be randomly assigned to one of the other 4 to respond to. With little time to prepare the question, my mind went blank. Everything Mom and I had discussed went out the window. Finally, in desperation, I wrote down the only question I could think of and hoped for the best. Then I said a few prayers for the next round. When the 5 of us were called on stage together, I was more nervous than I had ever been in my life. Between being one of the youngest girls there and my sudden hyper awareness of the number of people watching, 2 billion people in 150 countries, my palms were sweaty and my breathing was erratic. I had just enough brain power left to remind myself to focus not on my feelings but on what I needed to do and not do. Take a moment to collect your thoughts, breathe, don't say, well, don't trip on your dress. You might think I would have found some reassurance by reminding myself that the bookies had me among the favorites to win. I went in the opposite direction, taking pressure off myself by thinking about the 2 significant reasons why I was unlikely to win. First, the preceding year another Miss India, Yukta Mukhe, had won, so the chances that 2 Miss Indias would win consecutively were almost non-existent. And second, Lara had won the Miss Universe 2000 pageant just 6 months earlier in May. To make my odds even slimmer, how long could Indian women keep emerging victorious in this pageant? Wouldn't the judges want to spread the glory to some other countries? The pressure was on. I was representing my country on a global stage, and the pressure was also off. I almost certainly wouldn't win. Miss Kazakhstan and Miss Italy were called to answer the questions that I had been randomly picked for them, and then Miss Uruguay was called upon to answer the one I had written. If ignorance is bliss, then why do we seek knowledge? When I heard it loud, I realized what a tough question it was. The only reason I had written it down was that it was a question I had been during my Miss India pageant. I thought Miss Uruguay did a great job with it. Her response, given in English rather than her native Spanish, ended with the observation that ignorance is the main cause of so many problems around the whole world. Finally, it was my turn. I was the second to last person to be called upon, and my question had been written by Miss Turkey, Who do you think is the most successful woman living today and why? After a few seconds of nervous laughter that I desperately hoped would buy me more time, I launched into an answer that was no doubt influenced by my experience in convent schools. Schools run by the very organization the woman I named had founded. In retrospect, my choice was a bit cliche as much as I admire and respect the women whom I single out. I could have come up with a more original response. I said, there are a lot of people I admire, but one of the most admirable people is Mother Teresa. I admire her from the bottom of my heart for being so considerate, compassionate, and kind, giving up her life for people in India. Spoiler alert, Mother Teresa had died in 1997. I don't know exactly how much time elapsed between the final question and answer round and the announcement of the winner. I was backstage with the other four finalists, getting touched up and another spritz of hairspray, another layer of lip gloss, and trying to stay calm. Finally, the moment to reveal the next Miss World had arrived. This had always been an honor reserved for Mr. Morley, and now, in his stead, the new director of the Miss World pageant stepped to the microphone. Mrs. Morley first announced Miss Turkey Yüksel as the second runner-up, and then Miss Italy Georgia Palmas as the first runner-up. And there was that hush, that anticipatory moment when everyone was holding their breath before the new wearer of the Miss World crown was announced, and then incredibly my name was called. Of course, I had dreamed about winning over the months that I had been so diligently training, but I had never actually believed it could happen. Thank goodness Margarita Kravetsova, Miss Kazakhstan, and Katja Thompson Green, Miss Uruguay, immediately reached out to hug me because my knees were weak, and that moment of physical contact and support steadied me. Somehow, I made it to center stage where the outgoing Miss World, my fellow countrywoman, Yukta Mukhi, hugged and kissed me as she placed the crown on my head. I cried. I smiled. I did the wave. I was in shock. I took my slow, teary victory lap around the stage as the new Miss World. I searched the audience for my family but couldn't see them in the blinding glare of the lights. In the footage I have seen of those minutes after being crowned, I look both ecstatic and dazed in equal measure. And it's true, I was ecstatic and dazed. And I was also desperately trying to keep my strapless gown from sliding down my body. Earlier in the evening, the gown had been strategically strapped to my skin to secure it in my place, but as the evening wore on and I got more and more nervous, my perspiration caused the tape to loosen. I pressed my hands together in a namaste and kept them close to my body as much of the time as I could in an effort to hold my gown up. And I hoped for the best. I now do a namaste at almost every red carpet, and you know the origin story. Then celebratory pandemonium broke out on stage. Glittering confetti descended from the rafters, music played, and the 90 contestants who hadn't made it to the final round now streamed on stage to dance, hug one another, and have their photographs taken. Those moments, like so many others that night, are almost a complete blur. I remember being surrounded by photographers and security, and I remember looking for my parents and Sid, and finally finding them thanks to Anna Hayden, Miss World 1997, who along with Lara and Sushmita Sen, Miss Universe 1994, had called me to wish me good luck the night before. "Are you Priyanka's family?" Dinah had asked when she had seen them looking lost in the throngs of people trying to get on stage. Then she had shepherded them through all of the reporters, photographers, and others congregating around me to deliver them to my side. I remember hugging them all, crying tears of joy with my dad, but if so much of that night is a blur to me now, what Mom said to me in that moment is crystal clear in my memory. "What will happen to your studies now?" Seriously, what will happen to your studies now? To this day, I tease my mom about that. Here, I had just won Miss World. the goal we had been working toward together for almost a year and that she had completely upended her life for. And she was worrying about whether I would ever take my board exams and finish school. Can we please talk about this tomorrow, Mom? She was still in shock, of course. We all were. Everything about our lives, every single thing was just about to change in a huge, totally unforeseen way. Shortly thereafter, I was whisked away to the official coronation ceremony, which was a huge celebratory banquet with all the contestants and judges and sponsors. Trophies were awarded to the winners of the other competitions of the pageant in an embarrassment of riches. I received one for being chosen Miss World Continental Queen of Asia and Oceania, and I was crowned Miss World once more and presented with that title's trophy in the form of a beautiful glass globe. I was so grateful to Pradeep Guha for his help and support and that of his Times of India team that when I returned to India, I gave him the shiny orb as a token of my appreciation. It's still on his mantle with Sushmita Sen's crown. All the pageant contestants had been instructed to pack up the night before, and my bags had been for me from the very nice Hilton to the presidential suite at the luxurious Grosvenor House in London's upscale Mayfair district. A chaperone was assigned to stay with me in a room attached to mine when I went to my new hotel. I was hoping to spend some time with my family since I had still only seen them for a few chaotic minutes on stage. It would be the last chance I had have to see them before heading out on tour to appear in my new official capacity. For their part, Mom, Dad and Sid were flying to Boston the next day to visit Vimal Mamu, Vimla Mami, Divya and Rohan. Arrangements made months earlier for all of us when we had assumed I wouldn't win. It would be a trip to cheer me up and distract me, my parents thought, much like the stopover in Paris that Mom, Sid and I had made returning from Massachusetts after my years in the States. None of us could have imagined that my ticket would go unused when my family arrived at the Grosvenor house that night, eager to hug me and congratulate me and talk about everything that had happened. They were told by security that they couldn't see me. But I must see my daughter, my mother insisted when Mrs. Morley was finally reached by telephone. She is leaving tomorrow and I haven't even talked to her and I must see her. Mrs. Morley gave the okay and at last security let Mom, Dad and Sid upstairs. When they arrived at my suite, I was sitting on the huge bed wearing my crown and jabbering about my desperation to eat pizza. Since I wasn't allowed to go out without an official chaperone, Dad brought a large pepperoni back to the room. We ate and talked about the craziness of the night, and eventually the three of them left so I could get some sleep before my press conference the next morning. When my parents hugged me goodbye, they thought they were losing their daughter for the next year. They had nearly been prohibited from seeing me that night, and they had no idea when they had seen me again. When I hugged Sid goodbye, I didn't realize it was to be our last hug for a very long time. That night, I slept clutching my new crown. It was pretty, it was shiny, and it was mine. The next morning, moments before my first press conference as Miss World, I was told in a very matter-of-fact way, "Priyanka, there's something we need to discuss. Last night, the question you were asked was who you thought was the most successful woman living today. You answered Mother Teresa. Since Mother Teresa died in 1997, the issue of how you have won in spite of your answer will come up. You are articulate, you deserve to be Miss World, but it will come up. You are just going to have to acknowledge it and move on. Whatever happens out there, don't let it shake you. Go." No one actually said go and push me on stage, but that's how it felt. Miss Scotland, Michelle Watson, was hosting the press conference, but I barely heard a word she said because my mind was working overtime processing this new information, trying to think of a way to explain to the press how I could possibly have misheard the question. When it was my turn to speak, I stared at the reporters for a few moments, registering the staccato clicks of all their cameras before my survival instinct kicked in. Then kick in it did. I remember saying how grateful I was to have been chosen for this honor and how wonderful it was that we live in a world where mistakes can be forgiven. And then I added that most important of all was how Mother Teresa still lived on in my heart. So I hope they had accept my answer. There was some subsequent public criticism about my having answered the question incorrectly. I tried not to pay attention to it. In any case, I didn't have much time to worry about negative remarks in the news because I was immediately whisked away for a quick European tour. A week or so later, my parents got a surprise call in Boston from someone on the Miss India team who wanted to tell them where to be the next day for my homecoming. What? In India, at that time, it was the norm for the winner of an international pageant to be celebrated with a homecoming tour upon her return to her native soil. It was both an opportunity to honor the winner and a chance to express national pride and joy in the country's victory. The tour was invariably an exuberant affair, accompanied by a lot of press and fanfare. Nobody had imagined that my parents weren't going to be in the country. What? You are in America? The Miss India staffer said. What? We need to come back to India? My parents responded. Well, it's always better to have the support of your family on these occasions, the staffer said, if possible. Mom and Dad threw their clothes into their suitcase and raced to the airport. But first, they had to figure out what to do about Sid. The return trip to India would likely take almost 20 hours, and then they had been traveling with me and the Miss World in tourage for the next 10 days or so. It seemed unfair to put 11-year-old Sid through all of that, and so the decision was made to leave him in Vimal Mamu and Vimla Mami's care temporarily. I will come back for you soon, Sid, my mother told him, as soon as I can. Mom and Dad squeezed onto a flight to London, but then they were stuck. Absolutely no seats were available to New Delhi, so there was no possibility of meeting me in time until a British Airways agent from Pakistan named Shahid Malik heard them speaking Punjabi, understood their predicament, and deftly arranged for two fellow airline employees on an immediately departing plane to exchange their seats for spots on another flight. And he not only bumped Mom and Dad up to first class but had it announced that the parents of the new Miss World were on board, helping them to temporarily forget the arduousness of their sudden journey. I had say it was a miracle, but in fact, it was a very human gesture on the part of the compassionate Mr. Malik. I hope for the day when acts of simple kindness and shared humanity are as freely offered between our countries as they were offered that day by Mr. Malik and the two gentlemen who gave up their seats for my parents. I was flying back from Europe at the same time my parents were in the air. My first time flying first class. Before we touched down in Delhi, I asked if we might make a stop on the way to the hotel so that I could visit the Mangal Mahadev Birla Kanan temple in Shivaji Marg, Rangpuri. The temple itself is a simple one, but outside it stands the magnificent 100-foot tall statue of Lord Shiva. Other grand deities stand and sit nearby. I wanted to take blessings in this temple before my India journey got underway to express my immense gratitude for winning the pageant and for all the people who had helped me along the way, especially my parents, without whose constant encouragement in all my unusual endeavors since childhood this would not be happening. Mrs. Morley and the whole Miss World contingent accompanied me and we all took blessing. And we got back into the cars and continued on to our hotel in the heart of India's capital. As we pulled up, I saw my name on massive billboard-sized sign. The Moria Sheraton welcomes Miss World 2000, Priyanka Chopra. It took my breath away. My ambitions and goals changed and crystallized in that moment, and I remember thinking, I want that. I want my name to be in the big letters whenever it's written. 20 years later, I can look back and say to my younger self, you did it. With a couple of decades of constant perseverance, you made your dreams come true. My exhausted parents were waiting for me in my hotel room when I arrived, and in classic Punjabi fashion, so were at least 20 members of my extended family. Next stop, my hometown of Bareilly. I was so proud to be going back home. I shared this moment with all of my friends, but there was a complication. Before I ever entered any pageant, there was a member of the state government in Uttar Pradesh who had criticized beauty pageants for participating in Nari Shoshan or the exploitation of women. Pageants went against the culture of the country, the minister said. Now, there were those in the state government who were opposed to having any kind of homecoming celebration for me in Bareilly, as being crowned Miss World made me a representative of the pageant system. It took the Times of India to negotiate an agreement rather than my hometown throwing me a day or two of massive celebratory events. I would be allowed to return to Bareilly for just a few hours to hold a press conference and visit in an orphanage. My parents and I, along with Mrs. Morley, a couple of people from the Miss India team, and security personnel, flew home in an eight-seater and proceeded to the Bareilly Club, the comfortingly familiar spot where I had roamed the grounds with my middle school friends, hung out with my high school crew, and been winner of the May Queen Ball. All along the route, the road was lined with people smiling and waving at me. They clogged the sidewalk and they perched in trees. It was totally and utterly mind blowing. These were the streets where I used to ride my bike with friends and travel in a rickshaw to tutoring. I suspect that part of the reason there was such a massive outpouring of support for me in the streets is because I was here. Such a disappointingly quick visit. We weren't even spending the night. I wasn't going to be able to hug my friends or visit my old haunts or celebrate with those who had known me since childhood. I was sad about that, but the reality of my new world was kicking in. I was coming to understand that my life was not my own anymore. I had public responsibilities to live up to, and for the next year, they would have to come first. I would need to be where I was told when I was told, fresh, alert, and ready to be in the limelight. Seeing the people of my hometown crowding into the streets to show me their love and support sent surges of adrenaline rushing through my system, and the excitement of it all appeased my sadness about the brevity of my visit to some extent. Looking back on it though, I can see that in some ways I was operating on autopilot, as it was all so new and unlike anything I had ever experienced. Once we left Uttar Pradesh, things didn't get any easier. In spite of the national government standing up for me, rumors began to circulate about my family. My parents became increasingly concerned about bringing Sid back to Bareilly in this strange, unpredictable environment. Too much harsh scrutiny, too much cruel gossip, and some threats that they had no idea how to evaluate. And so they made an emotionally wrenching decision. They asked Vimal Mamu and ultimately Kiran Masi too to watch over Sid in America for an undetermined period of time until they figured out how to navigate this new reality. It would be more than a year and a half before they brought him back. Being left in America was a blow to my brother. Unlike me at his age, he had never been separated from our parents. I had lived with Nana and Nani as a baby and toddler. I had gone off to boarding school at age 7. Also, I was a different person, much more extroverted than Sid. He was 11 when he was left in America with no say in the matter. I was just shy of 13 and it had been my choice. Our aunts and uncles were loving and generous as always, but understandably, Sid felt abandoned by my parents and resentful of me, which was a complete reversal of our earlier life when I was sent away after his birth and had felt abandoned. Resentful too. Decision was hard for him to make peace with because he never really understood why he couldn't just be with us in India. I may not say it enough, but I am so grateful to Sid for his kindness and support all these years. As an 18-year-old, I simply didn't understand until much later the degree to which my life's sudden change of direction had affected him. Things eventually settled down a bit. If you can call traveling around the world, meeting heads of state, and attending constant photo shoots, press events, and fundraisers settling down, then early in the summer of 2001, a lingering head cold developed into what I thought was a very bad sinus infection, and I was having trouble breathing. This is a problem someone with asthma can't ignore. I was in London for work when this happened, so mom and I went to see a doctor who had been recommended by family friends. He discovered a polyp in my nasal cavity that would need to be surgically removed. Fortunately, a polypectomy sounded like a pretty routine procedure. Unfortunately, it wasn't. While shaving off the polyp, the doctor also accidentally shaved the bridge of my nose and the bridge collapsed. When it was time to remove the bandage and the condition of my nose was revealed, Mom and I were horrified. My original nose was gone. My face looked completely different. I wasn't me anymore. I felt devastated and hopeless. Every time I looked in the mirror, a stranger looked back at me, and I didn't think my sense of self or my self esteem would ever recover from the blow. The experience was very emotional for my whole family. My parents were doctors after all. How could this have happened? And to make matters worse, the experience was a public affair. Plastic Chopra. Just call it out right now. Immediately, the name started to show up in articles and newspaper items, and it has followed me my entire professional life. I was there to give an explanation for the obviously different nose, but I chose a course than that I have followed in all the years since. I decided that there was a line I was going to draw in my life. I'm an entertainer. That's what I have signed on to do, and that's what I love doing. I will say my lines, dance my dance, hit my mark. I will do my best to make you laugh and I will do my best to make you cry, but just because I'm a public person doesn't mean everything about my life has to be public knowledge. I get to choose what I share and when I share it. I'm talking about this now because it was a long time ago and we are all over it at this point. We are all over it, right? Following the polypectomy, I had several surgeries, and over time my nose normalized. While it took a few years of seeing a stranger gazing back at me every time I looked in the mirror, I have gotten accustomed to this face. Now, when I look in the mirror, I am no longer surprised. I have made peace with this slightly different me. On the other side of 35, with somewhere around 65 movies and a 2 decades long career in India and the US, and with high definition television, no less. I am just like everyone else. I look at myself in the mirror and think, maybe I can lose a little weight. I think maybe I can work out a little more, but I am also content. This is my face. This is my body. I might be flawed, but I am me. In the weeks before the 2000 Miss World pageant, I remember feeling that being from India was my superpower, a quality that would distinguish me anywhere I was, in anything I did. That superpower fortified me throughout my roller coaster of a year, and though my official Miss World duties ended where I placed the crown on the head of Miss Nigeria, Egbani Darego, in November of 2001, that feeling, that awareness of India as my strength has stayed with me. Representing my country and culture gave me confidence on an international stage, and it would continue to give me confidence as I broke into an industry that can be brutal on those who haven't had their mettle tested in the glare of public scrutiny. The entertainment industry.